They are hysterical, and they leave me exhausted. 11 words in blue ink. The world bought this as the confession of a monster. But for anyone who knows how to read a crime scene, that phrase isn't proof of murder. It is proof of the greatest violation of privacy in modern history. The police didn't find a smoking gun in apartment 5A. They stole a woman's soul imprinted on paper. The diary wasn't evidence found. It was intimacy plundered. We know the official script. The golden couple in the Algarve, the tragedy, the hunt for a predator. But when the dogs didn't bring back a body, and the DNA faltered, the machine needed a new villain. The narrative shifted violently. The grieving mother had to become the ice queen. The media needed fuel, and they found it in a cheap notebook on a bedside table. They transformed the venting of a mother of triplets into an admission of guilt. The world judged a woman for words she wrote in the dark, just to keep from going insane, convinced that exhaustion was a synonym for malice. It is easy to get lost in this shadow play. That is why Operation Black Box exists, to recover the truth buried under years of manipulated headlines. Our agents are active globally, analyzing what has been forgotten. I need to know the reach of our network today. From which city are you accessing this confidential file? Log your location in the comments right now. It is vital to see the map of our alliance growing. Now, the fracture in reality. What if I told you that the translation of those words was linguistically tampered with to make a British doctor sound like a psychopath? The central thesis of this dossier is clear. The diary does not reveal the motive for the crime. It reveals a system desperate for a scapegoat. Today, we will prove that the betrayal wasn't Kate hurting her daughter. The betrayal was the legal system twisting a mother's exhaustion until she looked like a motive for homicide. This was a reputation assassination, executed with ink and paper. But for this character assassination to happen, the weapon had to be stolen first. The diary didn't walk into the police station by itself. It was taken. To understand this violation, we need to go back to the moment the sanctity of that home was broken and ask who really opened the door to the enemy, handing over the only thing keeping Kate's sanity intact. To understand the Judiciary Police's obsession with Kate McCann's diary, we first need to comprehend the terrifying vacuum they found at the physical crime scene. The diary wasn't confiscated out of literary curiosity. It was sought as the last resort of an investigation that collided with a wall of physical impossibilities. The official narrative, the story of the predator who enters in the dead of night, depended on a single structural pillar to sustain itself: the children's bedroom window. The version presented to the world was cinematic. An intruder supposedly forced entry, maneuvered in the dark, and left carrying a child, all in absolute silence. Kate McCann stated that when she entered the room at 10 p.m., the metal shutters were raised and the window was wide open. This image is powerful. It creates an immediate scene of violation. However, when we apply the lens of technical forensics to that window, the story doesn't just crack, it disintegrates. We are talking about heavy metal shutters, common in the Algarve. Anyone who has handled this equipment knows it isn't silent. It doesn't glide like silk, it rattles. Technical analysis revealed that those shutters could only be opened from the inside using the strap, or brutally forced from the outside. But the crime scene analysis told a different story, a story of absence. There were no pry marks on the metal, no scratches on the paint, not the slightest sign of mechanical stress on the structure. The official narrative requires us to believe that a kidnapper, operating under the pressure of a crime, managed to levitate a noisy shutter without leaving a single tool mark. The physics becomes even more ruthless when we look at the windowsill. Locard's exchange principle, the foundation of modern forensic science, dictates that every contact leaves a trace. If an adult male had entered and exited through there, especially bearing the weight of an additional body, there would be transfer. Clothing fibers, shoe sole marks, biological residue, even the accumulated dust would have been disturbed, but the forensic report found the windowsill intact. The dust was there, immaculate, mocking the invasion theory. The only physical proof recovered from that window was a fingerprint, and it didn't belong to a stranger. It belonged to Kate McCann. The position of the print suggested someone opening the window to set a stage, not someone fleeing in panic. The window wasn't a criminal's escape route. It was the entry point for a lie into the investigation. If the physical barrier of apartment 5A was intact, then we need to look at the human barrier. the famous surveillance system of the Tapas 7. The group of friends sold the world the image of a Swiss watch of parental responsibility, a checking system every 20 minutes that would make any crime nearly impossible. But when we synchronize the watches of the testimonies, the gears don't mesh. What we find is a theater of shadows. Let's dissect the check done by Matthew Oldfield. He stated he went to the apartment, heard silence and saw light. But, and here is the fracture in logic that no competent screenwriter would let pass, he admitted he didn't look at Madeleine's bed. He saw the twins. He assumed everything was fine. What is the tactical utility of a security check where you don't verify the safety of the primary target? This testimony is conveniently ambiguous. It serves to place a friend at the scene, validating the parents' presence at dinner and shortening the time window, but leaves a convenient vacuum regarding the girl's physical presence. If she wasn't there at that moment, Oldfield's check inadvertently or deliberately served to cover the fact. And then we have the centerpiece of distraction, the Jane Tanner sighting. At 9:15 p.m., she claimed to have seen a man carrying a child, walking hurriedly away from the complex. For years, the police spent incalculable resources chasing this ghost. The whole world looked for this man. Years later, the truth emerged, cold and ridiculous. The man Jane Tanner saw was just an innocent British tourist returning from the night creche, carrying his own daughter. The sighting that sustained the kidnapping thesis during the most critical phase of the investigation was a misinterpretation. But while the spotlight was on Tanner's ghost, the Smith family sighting was ignored. Around 10 p.m., an Irish family saw a man carrying a child toward the beach, away from the restaurant zone, descending into the darkness. The description of this man didn't match the innocent tourist. The posture, the clothes, the haircut, everything aligned disturbingly with the figure of Gerry McCann. The official investigation, guided by the kidnapping narrative, chose to illuminate Tanner's story and leave the Smith story in the shadow. Why? Because Tanner's story pointed outward, to a stranger. The Smith story pointed inward. We are dealing with a performance where the script was written in real time, with alibis that contradict each other and sightings that served only to divert attention from the only timeline that matters, that of death. This places us before an operational dilemma for our Operation Black Box. The official narrative is a Swiss cheese of contradictions. On one side, we have windows that open without being touched. On the other, we have friends who check rooms without looking at the beds. I need you, as an analyst of this file, to stop and think. Which of these glitches in the matrix sounds more manufactured to you? The impossible physics of the immaculate window, or the convenience of a checking system that no one executed properly? Leave your tactical analysis in the comments below. Each observation from our community helps map the weaknesses of this story. Your comment is an intelligence report we add to the dossier. While humans spoke, adjusted versions, and created alibis, the truth remained silent on the carpet, waiting to be translated. And the translation didn't come from a detective, but from a biological tool evolved over thousands of years. The entry of Martin Grime and his elite dogs, Eddie and Keela, into the Algarve scenario marks the moment the investigation left the field of opinion and entered the field of hard science. It is vital you understand the authority of these agents. Eddie wasn't an ordinary police dog seeking drugs or explosives. He was a victim recovery dog. His training is binary and absolute. He ignores food, ignores live animals, ignores fresh blood. He only alerts to a specific chemical signature, human cadaverine, the scent of death. Keela, in turn, was the surgical specialist, trained to detect human blood, even if washed, even if invisible to the naked eye, even if old. They don't watch TV. They don't know who the McCanns are. They don't feel political pressure. They are biological measuring instruments. When Eddie entered apartment 5A, the place had already been cleaned and rented to tourists. Human logic said the scene was cold, but Eddie's sense of smell operates at a molecular level, traveling through time. The police inspection video is one of the most tense documents in our archive. We see the dog working, tail wagging, ignoring the parents' room, ignoring the kitchen, but when he gets to the living room, his body language changes. The focus narrows. He goes behind the sofa, near that same violated window, and there he barks. The alert. The defense tried to argue contamination. They said it could be the smell of food or diapers. That is an insult to science. Eddie doesn't alert to trash, he alerts to human cellular decomposition. The bark behind the sofa tells us, with the authority of biology, that a human body was there, in that room, long enough for the chemical process of death to leave its mark on the environment. And the trail didn't stop in the living room. Forensics expanded the perimeter to the Renault Scenic, the car rented by the McCanns 24 days after the disappearance. The official narrative says they were grieving victims. Eddie passed by several cars in the police lot without interest, but upon reaching the parents' Scenic he froze, alerted at the door, alerted at the trunk. Keeler confirmed with an alert for blood on the key and the lining. Here, the scientific failure of the official narrative becomes irreversible. The biological material found in the trunk was sent for DNA analysis. The preliminary result indicated a match of 15 out of 19 markers with Madeleine's profile. In any other homicide case, this would be the end of the line. But the complexity of low copy number DNA allowed the defense to create a cloud of legal doubt. However, legal doubt does not erase biological certainty. No kidnapper returns 24 days later to place a body in the car rented by the victim's parents. This is physically and logically impossible. Science was screaming that death happened inside that apartment and that the movement of the body involved that car. The intact window, the perforated alibis, and the dog's barks form a triangle of evidence that points to a single conclusion. There was no invasion. It was at this moment when the police realized the crime scene was a stage set and that biology contradicted the testimonies that the investigation drastically changed focus. They needed a motive. If it wasn't a stranger, why would the parents do this? They needed to get inside Kate McCann's mind, and that was when they remembered the notebook on the bedside table. So, if the kidnapping story is a farce dismantled by physics and biology, what was really happening in that woman's mind for the police to believe the answer to the crime was written in her personal diary? To answer this, we need to open the pages they tried to use to condemn her. Erase the mystery man from your mind for a second. Let's clear the stage of this tragic opera and look at the raw, naked setting. Forget the white van. Forget the predator lurking in the bushes. Forget the window that was never forced. If we remove the fiction we were sold, what remains is a reality much colder, much more domestic, and, terrible to say, much more logical. The real night didn't start with an invasion. It started with a silence that shouldn't have existed. Imagine the scene without the suspense soundtrack. It is shortly after 8:30 p.m. Apartment 5A is quiet. The children are sleeping, or they should be. But biology and exhaustion don't obey vacation schedules. Something happens in that room. It isn't a crime premeditated by movie villains. It is an accident. Perhaps a fall from that sofa where the dog Eddie smelled death weeks later. Perhaps an adverse reaction to medication given to ensure a night of sleep for exhausted parents. What happens next is not the action of a monster, but the collapse of a routine. When Gerry or Kate enter that room for the first real check, not those phantom checks the friends claimed, they don't find an empty bed. They find a child who doesn't respond. And it is in that millisecond that this family's universe shatters. The panic that sets in isn't the panic of someone looking for a lost daughter. It is the absolute terror of someone realizing their daughter is dead under their watch. At this precise moment, human psychology undergoes a frightening mutation. The instinct to save the child hits a wall of reality. There is nothing left to save. The instinct that takes command is self-preservation. They aren't just parents, they are doctors. They are respected figures in British society. A fatal accident inside a closed room, possibly caused by negligence or error in administering sedatives, is not just a personal tragedy. It is the end. It is the loss of medical licenses. It is prison for manslaughter. It is eternal public shame. It is losing custody of the other two children, the twins, who are still sleeping right next to them. The human mind, under extreme pressure, is capable of terrible rationalizations to survive. Faced with the lifeless body, the priority shifts from the truth to the narrative. The body ceases to be Madeleine and becomes incriminating evidence. The window of opportunity wasn't used by a stranger to get in. It was mentally fabricated by the parents so the guilt could get out. They needed a scenario where they were the victims, not the defendants. They needed an external villain so the internal villain, negligence, would never be discovered. The staging of the open window, the theater of the dinner, the frantic search for someone they knew wasn't out there, None of that was to find Madeleine. It was to ensure no one found her in the wrong place. This reconstruction hurts because it is too human. It doesn't require a complex, trackless international child trafficking conspiracy. It requires only two terrified human beings, with everything to lose, making the worst decision of their lives in a moment of shock. But why sustain this lie for so long? Why not confess to the accident? Here we enter the psychology of the mask. The fear of scandal for an upper-middle-class British family is a powerful gravitational force. Admitting the daughter died from lack of care would be social death. And once the first lie is told, someone took her, there is no way back. You cannot tell the police 3 days later, sorry, actually she fell off the sofa. The lie is a prison. They became hostages of the very story they invented. They needed to believe their own lie to survive. This is what we call cognitive dissonance. To manage to wake up every day, look at the cameras and ask for help, a part of their mind had to bury the reality of the accident and embrace the fantasy of the kidnapping. They weren't just acting for the world, they were acting for themselves, so as not to collapse under the weight of guilt. Narcissism also plays a role here, the belief that people like us don't go to prison. People like us don't make these gross errors. The image of the perfect family had to be preserved, even if the cost was the truth about their daughter's fate. Stop and analyze this scenario coldly. What sounds more plausible to you, operator? A surgical kidnapping operation, no fingerprints, no stranger DNA, carried out by a ghost who enters and exits through windows that don't open from the outside, or raw, brutal human panic to cover up a domestic accident to save one's own skin and career. Leave your verdict in the comments now. I need to know if our task force is aligned. Your logical validation is fundamental here, because if you accept that the motivation for the cover-up exists, the evidence I am about to reveal stops being a stolen document and becomes the skeleton key the police tried to use to break this mask. If we agree the kidnapping story is a farce, then we need to understand how the system tried to prove it. And here is the definitive proof. The smoking gun of this act is not the DNA. The DNA already proved death. The smoking gun is Kate McCann's diary, but not in the way the tabloids told you. The Portuguese police found themselves in a dead end. They had the dog's barks indicating death. They had the DNA indicating Madeleine in the car, but legally they were paralyzed. The British lab classified the DNA as too complex to guarantee a swift conviction. Without a body and without a confession, the case was about to go cold. The judiciary police needed a motive. They needed to get inside Kate's head. They needed to prove she was on the edge, that she was capable of a snap, a moment of violent rupture. That was when the diary entered the scene. This notebook wasn't surrendered voluntarily as aid to find the girl. It was seized, and its content became the prosecution's main weapon when science failed in court. The police knew they couldn't arrest Kate based solely on Eddie's nose, so they decided to use her own words to build the profile of a killer. The proof they leaked to the press was the translation of Kate's words. In English, Kate wrote that the children were hysterical. In British culture, in the context of a tired mother, this means agitated children, laughing, crying, running, kids being difficult kids. But when this was translated and leaked to the Portuguese press and into the case files, the word gained the clinical and Latin weight of hysteria, of madness, of psychiatric loss of control. They took the phrase, "I'm worn out," and painted it as the lament of a woman who hated motherhood. The shocking revelation here isn't that Kate killed her daughter because she wrote this. The revelation is that the police system, knowing they had biological proof of death, the dogs and DNA, but being politically prevented from using it, resorted to character assassination. The diary is the definitive proof not of Kate's crime, but of the investigation's desperation. They needed the world to hate her. They needed you to look at her and see a monster, so that public pressure would force a confession that physical evidence failed to extract. The selective leaking of these pages was an act of war. Someone inside the structure, and evidence points to strategic leaks from the investigation coordination itself to newspapers like Correio da Manhã, decided that if they couldn't arrest them legally, they would condemn them morally. The relative or source who handed over or validated this diary wasn't helping find Madeleine. They were handing Kate's head on a silver platter to the media. The diary proves the police knew it was a domestic case. They weren't looking for a pedophile on the beach while reading her diary. They were looking for the motive for maternal collapse. The focus on the diary confirms that the main line of investigation was always accidental death and concealment. If they believed in the abduction, the diary would be irrelevant. The fact they spent so much time translating and analyzing those pages is the silent confirmation that they knew the answer was inside apartment 5A, not outside. The diary was the desperate attempt to give a human voice to the silent tragedy the dogs sniffed out. It was the tool used to try and break the mask of coldness the parents maintained. But in doing so, by violating this intimacy and distorting the words, the system ended up creating an even bigger smokescreen, where the discussion became, "Is Kate evil?" instead of, "Where is the body?" With this proof on the table, the question changes drastically. It is no longer what happened to Madeleine, for logic and biology have already answered. She died in the apartment. The question now is, who in the corridors of power allowed this charade to continue? If the police knew, if the dogs found it, if the diary indicated domestic stress, why was no one arrested? The answer involves a conspiracy much larger than just a panicked couple protecting their careers. It involves the power of an entire state protecting its diplomatic relations. When biology delivered the answer no one wanted to hear, the machinery of the state didn't move to handcuff the culprits. It turned its gears to crush the evidence. The dog's alert and the DNA markers in the trunk did not trigger a hunt for justice, but rather a diplomatic cleanup operation. What we watched was not an investigation failure, it was an obstruction success. The Portuguese police, who dared to follow the trail of the cadaver indicated by Eddie and Keela, suddenly found themselves at war not against kidnappers, but against the political force of a foreign government. Forensic truth became a diplomatic inconvenience. The strategy changed. If you can't erase the blood, you destroy the reputation of the one who found it. The system looked at the biological proof and chose voluntary blindness. But the price of this blindness wasn't paid by the suspects. It was charged with devastating interest to those who tried to do the dirty work of digging for the truth. Look at Gonçalo Amaral. He wasn't just removed from the case, he was publicly executed in slow motion. The investigation coordinator, who refused to swallow the kidnapping thesis when the evidence screamed concealment, had his career shredded, his assets frozen, and his life assassinated by endless lawsuits. Amaral became a living warning, a scarecrow placed in the legal field to warn any future investigator. This is what happens when you touch the untouchables. The message was clear and brutal. Justice has a glass ceiling. The system devoured its own agents to ensure the official version remained immaculate. It is in the face of this wall of bought silence and destroyed careers that our indignation needs to turn into action. They counted on our forgetfulness. They counted on time erasing the details. They were wrong. If you taste the bitter flavor of this injustice and refuse to accept that financial power can rewrite reality, this is the moment to take a side. Officially join our Operation Black Box. Subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications. Each new subscription is a vote of no confidence in this bankrupt system. One more investigator refusing to let this file be burned. We need volume, we need numbers, we need you. The moral verdict of this task force is already formed. The absence of a conviction in court does not mean absence of guilt, it means only the triumph of bureaucracy over truth. The Madeleine McCann case isn't an unsolvable mystery where clues evaporated. The clues are there, preserved in dog reports and DNA charts. What is missing is not evidence, it is political will. The crime remains open in police files, but in our undisputable archive, the conclusion is clear. Justice wasn't blind, it was gagged. The system won the legal battle, burying the facts under mountains of paperwork and threats. But in the midst of this institutional darkness, where the law protected those it should have investigated, a final question remains that we must face, perhaps the most disturbing of all. If the truth can be manipulated so easily in plain sight of the whole world, what does that teach us about the fragility of our own reality? The final lesson I take as I seal this dossier on the diary is not about a mother's guilt, but about the rot of a method. My absolute conviction, after analyzing every translated line and every calculated leak, is that Kate McCann's notebook was never the key to solving the crime. It was the smokescreen used to hide the police's failure. What keeps me awake isn't the content of those pages, but the ease with which the system transformed private pain into public spectacle. They couldn't find Madeleine's body on the beach or in the sea, so they decided to look for it in the psyche of an exhausted woman. The real betrayal wasn't what she wrote. It was the state deciding that a citizen's intimacy was worth less than the need to save the reputation of a failed investigation. Faced with this violation, to remain silent is to be complicit. Forgetfulness is the weapon they use to ensure impunity. That is why I need you to use the space below now. I don't just want a generic comment. I want you to put on record, in permanent words, your repudiation of this maneuver. Transform the comments section into an incident log for our task force. Write what you feel, knowing that maternal exhaustion was sold as a confession to homicide. I will read every testimony, because knowing that this indignation is shared is what keeps this operation alive. But indignation alone doesn't open files. Forensic research, document translation, and maintaining this intelligence base have real costs. If you want to go beyond anger and become the fuel for this machine, there are two paths open today. First, you can trigger the super thanks. View this not as a donation, but as buying ammunition for our next offensive. Each contribution accelerates our ability to process data and expose the next lie. Second, if you wish to occupy a seat in our command room, become a member of the channel. Members are our operational elite. You ensure we have total independence to touch the wounds mainstream media ignores, and in exchange, you receive privileged access to the backstage of our investigation. The super thanks loads the weapon. The members decide where we point it, and thanks to this solid base, the target of the next mission is already locked. The diary was just one piece of the puzzle. Now we need to confront the human barrier that protected the couple that night. 7 friends, 7 alibis, 7 versions that do not hold up. In the next report of Operation Black Box, we will dissect the pact of silence of the Tapas 7 and reveal the contradictions they swore to take to the grave. Check your subscription and the notification bell. You won't want to miss the moment this wall falls. This file is closed, but vigilance is perpetual. The truth doesn't ask for permission to enter. We just unlock the door.